All right, let's just jump straight into this explainer. Imagine for a second an entity that could raise its own army, build forts, collect taxes, negotiate international treaties, and literally wage wars across the entire globe. Well, today we're unpacking the story of an institution that absolutely shattered every single rule of geopolitics. Because, you see, it wasn't a kingdom, it wasn't a government, it was a company. Just think about the sheer absurdity of that for a moment. A profit seeking business, driven entirely by its shareholders, holding this much world altering power. Over the course of 2.5 centuries, this single commercial venture morphed into something far, far more powerful than the very governments that birthed it. Section 1. A company, not a kingdom. Let's set the scene in London, right around the year 1600. Moving right along to Section 2. The cost of doing business. When those London merchants first set sail, they absolutely were not seeking world domination. Actually, scratch that. They were really just trying to survive. They were up against the Portuguese, the Dutch, the French, and the stakes for trading things like spices and textiles were astronomically high. I mean, ships were incredibly expensive, the voyages themselves were deadly, and piracy was a constant, everyday threat. To survive in this fiercely competitive environment, they quickly realized that ships and sailors weren't going to cut it. They needed real political protection. And that kicks off this wild, compounding escalation. It's like a giant puzzle where every piece forces the next one into place. To store those valuable trade goods, they built commercial outposts, right? Well, to protect those outposts, they had to arm themselves. But armed outposts naturally require you to build local political influence, which then leads to acquiring actual territory. And hey, once you hold territory, you can collect taxes to fund the whole cycle all over again. It was a perfectly logical series of business steps that just snowballed into an entirely unintended empire. Which brings us to Section 3, from merchants to rulers. So as the 18th century dawned, the Mughal Empire, which had dominated the Indian subcontinent for ages, was starting to weaken. This created a massive power vacuum, and the company aggressively expanded its footprint to fill it. But the real turning point? That happened in 1757 at the Battle of Plassey. Robert Clive led company forces to a decisive victory. And suddenly, a private business had direct influence over Bengal, which was literally one of the wealthiest regions in the entire world at the time. And that directly leads to a massive paradigm shift in 1765, the granting of Diwani rights. The company was given the authority to collect revenue across Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. This was their big aha moment. They discovered a shocking truth. Controlling the tax system of a wealthy region was infinitely more profitable than simply selling tea and spices. Millions. I really want to emphasize the staggering scale of this. A private corporate entity was now directly collecting taxes from millions of people. Think about that. This was completely unprecedented in global history. The East India Company wasn't just a merchant organization anymore. It had effectively become a sovereign state. Section 4. The problem with corporate power. As you might guess, the consequences of a corporation acting like a government were absolutely catastrophic, culminating in unimaginable horrors like the devastating Bengal famine of 1770. And the reason for this massive failure is fundamental. A government is, theoretically at least, supposed to provide stability and welfare for its people. But a business? A business is designed for one thing: generating financial returns for its shareholders. When one single institution tries to do both, the contradiction is just deadly. Hundreds of thousands. To enforce this incredibly delicate balancing act and keep extracting wealth, the company's private army just exploded in size. By the 19th century, they commanded hundreds of thousands of Indian soldiers known as sepoys. Let that sink in for a second. A boardroom of executives sitting around a table in London now controlled a private standing army larger than most European nations. They were fighting wars and negotiating treaties from a position of just immense strength. Meanwhile, back in London, the dynamic was incredibly messy. The British state was benefiting enormously from all this wealth, the secured global trade, and the expanded influence. But on the flip side, the government was growing terrified. You had a private business making massive, independent foreign policy decisions overseas, triggering wildly expensive wars and creating terrifying financial risks for British investors. And the company's global footprint was so massive that it actually began altering history on the other side of the planet. Take the 1773 Tea Act, which gave the company special privileges to sell tea in the American colonies. Well, this infuriated the colonists so much that they dumped the cargo right into the harbor.
Yep, the Boston Tea Party. A trading monopoly based in London accidentally helped spark the American Revolution. A commercial operation essentially nudged a brand new nation into existence. Crazy, right?
All right, Section 5, the fall of the empire. Because, well, you can only govern millions of people like a ruthless business for so long before things snap. By 1857, all that boiling resentment over the company's heavy taxation, land grabs, and military practices finally reached a breaking point. It exploded into the Indian Rebellion, a huge, brutal uprising among Indian soldiers that spread like wildfire across northern and central India. The company completely lost control, and the British military had to violently step in to suppress it. The political fallout from this was absolute. The British government finally realized that corporate rule just could not continue for another day. So, the Government of India Act of 1858 officially transferred the administration of India directly to the British Crown. Stripped of all its political power, the company was completely dissolved by 1874. The whole shebang, this corporate empire it had spent centuries building, was just gone. Which brings us to our final part, Section 6, a warning for modern times. The East India Company might be long gone, but its history serves as a pretty stark warning for us today. Just look at the staggering capabilities of modern megacorporations. They control technology that billions of us use every single day. They manage impossibly complex global supply chains. They own massive chunks of intellectual property. And while things are definitely different today, these entities can still heavily influence governments and reshape entire industries. The line between a corporation and a state, yeah, it can still become dangerously thin. Because whenever goods move across borders, power moves right along with them. This is sort of the hidden nature of globalization. Ships don't just bring products, they bring profound influence. Capital doesn't just build factories, it builds powerful political alliances that can, subtly or not so subtly, reshape the sovereignty of entire nations. Look, a business can be incredibly powerful just by controlling markets. But when a company begins controlling taxation, military force, territory, or the very laws we live by, it stops being merely a business. It becomes something else entirely, something much, much closer to a state. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to chew on long after this explainer is over. How powerful should a company be before society stops and asks, wait, who is actually in control here? The East India Company crossed that line centuries ago, evolving from a simple group of merchants into a terrifying global empire. As we look at the immense, borderless scale of modern corporations today, it's a question we absolutely must keep asking ourselves. Keep questioning the forces that shape our world, and hey, thanks for exploring this incredible slice of history with me.